It was a Tuesday morning in late autumn, the kind of morning that carried with it a quiet chill. The leaves had already turned amber and red, carpeting the sidewalks of Maplewood, a small town where everyone knew each other's names, or at least recognized their faces. For Emily Parker, a 32-year-old mother of one, the day began like any other. Her alarm rang at 6:30 a.m. She moved through the familiar routine, making breakfast, packing her son's lunch, and checking that his homework was neatly tucked into his backpack. Emily wasn't glamorous or wealthy, but she was deeply loved by those around her. She had a reputation for kindness, always offering to help a neighbor, volunteering at school events, and putting her son, Jacob, above everything else. That morning, Emily dressed simply: jeans, a light sweater, and her favorite gray scarf. She tied her hair back into a loose ponytail, grabbed her car keys, and called for Jacob. He was 7 years old, sleepy-eyed, dragging his feet as most children do when mornings come too quickly. She gave him a quick hug, a reassuring smile, and ushered him into their blue sedan. Neighbors later recalled seeing the car pull out of the driveway at around 7:40 a.m. Nothing appeared unusual. The car headed down Cedar Lane toward the elementary school, just as it had countless mornings before. At 7:55 a.m., Emily pulled up to the school. She parked near the curb, leaned over, and kissed Jacob on the forehead. "Have a good day, sweetheart. I'll see you after school," she told him. Jacob later remembered his mom smiling as she waved goodbye. It was the last time anyone saw her alive. Witnesses confirmed that Emily drove away immediately after dropping Jacob off. Several parents saw her car leaving the school zone, turning east onto Willow Road. After that, the trail went cold. She never made it home. She never made it to work. She simply disappeared. When 3 p.m. came, Jacob waited on the school steps, expecting his mom's familiar car to pull up. But she never arrived. At first, teachers assumed she was running late. When 30 minutes passed, a staff member tried calling her cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. Concern began to grow, but it wasn't until an hour later, when Jacob's grandmother rushed to pick him up, that the full reality set in. Emily was gone. By evening, her family contacted the police. At first, officers advised caution. Adults sometimes needed space. Maybe she had decided to take a short trip, they suggested. Maybe stress had gotten the better of her. But her family pushed back. Emily wasn't the kind of person who would vanish, not without telling someone, and certainly not without her son. The police opened a missing person case that night. They visited her home. Nothing was out of place. Her purse and wallet were gone, but her credit cards hadn't been used. The bed was made, the breakfast dishes were still in the sink. It was as if she had left to drop off her son and never come back. Local news picked up the story quickly. "Young mother missing after dropping son at school," read the headline the next day. Her photo spread across television screens, a smiling woman with warm brown eyes and a dimple in her left cheek. For her family, the first 24 hours felt like a blur. They organized search parties, retraced her route from the school, and called everyone who might have seen her. But no one had. Her car was missing, her phone was off, and there were no signs of a struggle. That ordinary Tuesday morning, the school drop-off, the wave goodbye, would become the starting point of a mystery that haunted the town for years. Emily Parker had vanished in broad daylight, leaving behind only questions, heartbreak, and a 7-year-old boy who would spend the rest of his childhood wondering what happened to his mother. In missing person cases, the first 48 hours are considered the most critical. Investigators know that if they don't find strong leads in that window, the trail often goes cold. For Emily Parker, those first 2 days revealed more questions than answers. Detectives began by retracing her steps. Witnesses confirmed her presence at the school drop-off. Multiple parents remembered seeing her wave goodbye to Jacob. Several noted the blue sedan pulling away. But from there, it was as if the earth had swallowed her whole. Police canvassed the area along Willow Road, the route she was believed to have taken. They asked store owners to check their surveillance cameras. Nothing. Not a single camera captured her car after she left the school zone. This baffled investigators. Maplewood wasn't a big city, but traffic cameras and business security systems were common enough. Yet, her vehicle, a four-door 2008 sedan, seemed to vanish. By the end of the second day, the search expanded beyond town limits. Helicopters scanned highways while volunteers combed through wooded trails and riversides. Dozens of community members showed up to help, carrying flashlights, distributing flyers with Emily's face on them, and calling her name in the woods. Jacob's school organized a vigil where classmates held candles and prayed for his mother's safe return. Despite the community effort, there were no signs of Emily. No discarded belongings, no abandoned vehicle, no cell phone ping. Her phone had been switched off minutes after she left the school, according to cell tower data. This raised suspicion. Phones don't just shut off on their own. Either the battery died, which her family said was unlikely since she always charged it overnight, or someone deliberately turned it off. As detectives dug deeper, they started examining Emily's personal life. They questioned her friends, co-workers, and neighbors. By all accounts, Emily was happy. She had a steady job as a dental assistant, no financial troubles, and a supportive family. She didn't drink heavily, didn't party, didn't have enemies. Her life was ordinary, too ordinary for a sudden disappearance. But as investigators know, appearances can be deceiving. Soon, rumors began to circulate. Some whispered that Emily might have left voluntarily, overwhelmed by single motherhood. Others speculated about an unknown relationship, a secret she might have hidden. The police didn't rule anything out. One of the first people questioned was Jacob's father, Daniel. He and Emily had divorced 3 years earlier, but remained in contact because of their son. Daniel insisted he had nothing to do with her disappearance. He was at work the morning Emily vanished, with several co-workers vouching for his presence. Though tension lingered between him and Emily, there was no evidence linking him to her case. Still, detectives kept him under quiet observation. Then there was her neighbor, a middle-aged man named Richard who reportedly kept an eye on Emily. He was seen as overly friendly, sometimes intrusive. He told police he last saw her the evening before her disappearance when she was unloading groceries. His alibi checked out, but detectives couldn't ignore the uneasy feeling he gave people in the neighborhood. Despite dozens of interviews, the investigation stalled. With each passing day, hope dimmed. Jacob stayed with his grandparents, asking nightly if the police had found his mother. His innocence and his inability to fully grasp the gravity of the situation haunted the officers working the case. By week's end, media outlets across the state were covering the story. "Where is Emily Parker?" blared headlines. Talk shows speculated on her fate, while social media lit up with theories ranging from abduction to voluntary disappearance. Her face became known far beyond Maplewood, yet none of the attention brought answers. Then came the first chilling discovery. On the 8th day, a hunter walking through a wooded area 5 miles east of town reported finding something unusual. Police rushed to the scene and found a gray scarf tangled in the underbrush. It matched the description of the one Emily was last seen wearing. The scarf appeared to have been ripped, as if torn during a struggle. But there was no sign of Emily, no blood, no additional evidence. Investigators searched the woods extensively, but the trail ended as abruptly as it began. The scarf deepened the mystery. Was it a genuine clue, or a planted distraction? Detectives now faced the grim reality. Emily hadn't just wandered off. Something darker had happened. But who was behind it? And why had she been targeted? What started as a missing persons case was quickly evolving into something far more sinister. The discovery of Emily Parker's scarf should have brought clarity, but instead, it fueled even more speculation. Detectives now faced mounting pressure from the media, from Emily's family, and from a community desperate for answers. But beneath the surface, quiet suspicions and hidden truths began to emerge. The first focus remained on those closest to Emily. Statistically, when a woman disappears, someone within her inner circle is often involved. Investigators doubled back to Jacob's father, Daniel. He continued to insist on his innocence, but subtle cracks in his story began to appear. Co-workers confirmed he had been at work the morning Emily vanished, but there was a window of time unaccounted for, roughly 40 minutes between when he left home and when he clocked in. Detectives wondered, was that enough time to intercept Emily after she left the school? Daniel's demeanor didn't help either. He appeared calm during interviews, perhaps too calm, answering questions with rehearsed precision. Was it grief suppressed or guilt concealed? Adding to suspicion, Emily's family revealed that she and Daniel had argued just days before her disappearance. The argument, overheard by Jacob's grandmother, concerned custody arrangements. Daniel reportedly wanted more time with Jacob, while Emily resisted. Could the disagreement have escalated further than anyone imagined? Detectives searched Daniel's car and home, but found nothing incriminating. Still, the unease lingered. Without physical evidence, suspicion wasn't enough to move forward. Attention then shifted back to Emily's personal life. Friends described her as devoted to her son, but some hinted she had been distant in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. One close friend confided that Emily mentioned feeling watched. At first, her friend assumed it was just stress or paranoia, but in hindsight, the statement carried a chilling weight. Had someone been following her? If so, who? The neighbor, Richard, came under renewed scrutiny. He had a history of complaints from other residents, unwelcome advances, intrusive questions, late-night visits under flimsy excuses. Though none of these behaviors were crimes on their own, they painted a disturbing picture. Detectives learned that Richard had once offered to help Emily with home repairs, despite her declining multiple times. Could his obsession have turned dangerous? When questioned again, Richard maintained his alibi. On the morning Emily disappeared, he was at a local hardware store, a receipt confirming his purchase of supplies at 8:10 a.m., just minutes after Emily was last seen. That receipt gave him some credibility, yet detectives couldn't shake the possibility that he still played a role. The investigation took a darker turn when digital forensics came into play. Police obtained records from Emily's social media accounts and emails. What they found unsettled them. Several messages, sent from an untraceable account, had arrived in her inbox in the weeks prior to her disappearance. The emails were short, cryptic, and unsettling. "You can't hide from me. I see you every day. Soon." Emily had never reported these messages to police. Her family believed she didn't want to cause panic. But clearly she had been targeted by someone who knew her routines. Detectives traced the emails as far as they could, but the account was created with false information and routed through multiple servers. Whoever sent them knew how to cover their tracks. By this point, the public's imagination ran wild. Theories ranged from a random abduction to a calculated crime of passion. Some insisted Daniel was responsible. Others pointed fingers at Richard. A smaller group believed Emily might have left voluntarily, staging her disappearance to escape a secret double life. Her absence weighed heavily on Jacob. At just 7 years old, he didn't fully understand why his mother wasn't coming home. He clutched her photograph every night, asking his grandparents questions they couldn't answer. His grief became the silent reminder of what was truly at stake. As weeks turned into months, Emily's case grew colder. Tips slowed down, leads dried up, and media coverage shifted to newer stories. For the Parker family, time felt frozen on that autumn morning when she waved goodbye to her son. But behind the scenes, detectives refused to let the case die. They began to quietly pursue one last angle, one that suggested Emily's disappearance wasn't about family disputes or neighborhood obsessions. Instead, it pointed to something far more calculated, something orchestrated. Because when investigators reviewed the traffic cameras one final time, they noticed something they had missed: another car. A dark SUV had followed Emily's sedan out of the school zone that morning. It never appeared on cameras again. Was this the key to unraveling the mystery? Or just another dead end in a case already drowning in secrets? The discovery of the dark SUV was like finding a shadow lurking at the edge of a photograph. Easy to overlook, but impossible to ignore once spotted. For weeks, investigators had combed through footage from traffic and security cameras, focusing almost exclusively on Emily's car. But now, in the background of the grainy recording near the school, there it was, a dark-colored SUV following just a few car lengths behind. It wasn't unusual for vehicles to leave the school zone in the morning rush, but what made this SUV stand out was its consistency. From 3 different camera angles, the vehicle maintained a steady distance behind Emily's sedan. And then, just like her car, it vanished from sight. Detectives zeroed in on this new lead. The footage wasn't sharp enough to make out the license plate, but they could see the model, a mid-2000s black Chevrolet Tahoe. A common vehicle, yes, but combined with the timing and the circumstances, it suddenly became the centerpiece of the investigation. The question was, who was driving it? Police appealed to the public for information, asking anyone who had seen a black SUV in the area to come forward. Dozens of calls poured in, most useless, some intriguing. One caller reported seeing a Tahoe pulled over near Willow Road around 8:15 a.m. on the day Emily disappeared. Another claimed they noticed a similar SUV parked on a dirt path leading into the woods east of town. The problem was, none of these leads could be confirmed. And without a license plate, the vehicle was a phantom, real but untouchable. Emily's family was both relieved and terrified by this revelation. Relieved because it meant she hadn't simply vanished into thin air. There was a trail. Terrified because if someone had followed her, it likely wasn't random. Someone had planned this. Someone had been waiting. Detectives revisited the disturbing emails Emily had received. Could the sender and the SUV driver be the same person? It seemed too coincidental to dismiss. The theory began to form. Whoever had been stalking her online might have escalated their obsession into something far more dangerous. At this point, investigators expanded their search to known offenders in the region. They combed through databases of individuals with histories of harassment, stalking, or violent crimes involving women. Several owned SUVs, but none matched the specific description or had any verifiable link to Emily. Meanwhile, the SUV sighting reignited public interest. News anchors ran dramatic segments. Who's behind the wheel of the dark SUV? Talk shows speculated endlessly. Some suggested it was Daniel, Emily's ex-husband, borrowing or renting a vehicle to avoid detection. Others pointed fingers at Richard, the unsettling neighbor. Both men denied owning such a car, and neither could be directly connected to one. But then came a chilling detail. A witness surfaced claiming that about a week before Emily's disappearance, they had seen a dark SUV parked near her street late at night. The vehicle's lights were off, engine running. At the time, the witness thought nothing of it. Now it seemed like surveillance. The more investigators uncovered, the clearer the picture became. Emily hadn't been a random victim. She had been targeted. Her son Jacob continued to struggle with her absence. At school, he grew quieter, retreating into himself. Teachers reported that he often stared out the window during class, as if expecting to see his mother's car pull up. At night, he asked his grandparents if the bad man in the car had taken her. His words, though childlike, echoed the fears of the entire community. Detectives pressed harder. They checked rental car agencies, hoping someone might have borrowed a Tahoe around the time Emily vanished. Nothing concrete turned up. They investigated stolen vehicles. Again, no match. The SUV was like a ghost, appearing only in those crucial few minutes after Emily left the school. As winter settled in, the case once again began to stall. The scarf, the emails, the SUV, each clue was significant, but none connected fully. And without Emily, without a body, detectives were left piecing together a puzzle with half its pieces missing. But just when hope seemed to fade, another discovery pushed the investigation in a new direction. 3 months after Emily's disappearance, a hiker stumbled upon an abandoned vehicle deep in the woods, 10 miles from Maplewood. It was a dark Chevrolet Tahoe. Its windows were smashed, its tires slashed, and inside the seats were stained with something that looked disturbingly like blood. The SUV was no longer just a shadow on grainy footage. It was real, and it carried the promise of answers, along with the dread of what those answers might reveal. The discovery of the black Chevrolet Tahoe sent shockwaves through the investigation. For months, detectives had been chasing shadows, and now, finally, they had something tangible. But what they found inside the abandoned SUV only deepened the mystery. The vehicle was discovered by a hiker on a desolate trail that wound deep into the state forest. It was hidden off a dirt path, covered partially by fallen branches and leaves, as though someone had made a hasty attempt to conceal it. From the outside, the SUV was battered, the windows shattered, the tires slashed, and a thick layer of dirt coating the paint. It looked as though it had been sitting there for weeks, untouched by anyone until now. When investigators arrived, they quickly secured the area. Forensic teams combed through every inch of the Tahoe. The first and most disturbing discovery was the stains. Dark patches soaked into the fabric of the back seat, later confirmed to be human blood. But without a body, without DNA results, no one could yet say for sure whose blood it was. The second discovery was equally unsettling. A single gray button lying on the floor of the passenger seat. It was small, but it matched the style of the sweater Emily had been wearing on the morning she disappeared. Had it torn off during a struggle? Or was it deliberately left behind as a breadcrumb? Detectives also noted the absence of fingerprints. Whoever abandoned the SUV had wiped it meticulously. No usable prints were recovered, not even on the steering wheel or door handles. This suggested planning, not panic. Then there was the trunk. Inside, officers found 2 lengths of rope, a roll of duct tape, and an empty gas can. The items were sinister in their implications, but again circumstantial. Were they connected to Emily? Or simply tools discarded by whoever had used the vehicle? The Tahoe itself was traced back to a rental company 2 towns over. Records showed it had been rented under a false identity, one that led nowhere. A fake driver's license, a prepaid debit card, all dead ends. Whoever orchestrated this knew exactly how to cover their tracks. The discovery reignited the media frenzy. SUV tied to missing mother found in woods, headlines screamed. News crews swarmed Maplewood, interviewing residents, speculating endlessly about the grisly evidence. For Emily's family, the news was devastating. The blood, the button, the rope, each detail chipped away at the fragile hope they had been clinging to. Still, detectives pressed forward. The bloodstains were sent to the lab for DNA analysis. While waiting for results, they considered the possibilities. If it was Emily's blood, the chances of finding her alive were slim. But if it belonged to someone else, it could mean she hadn't been the only victim. Meanwhile, suspicion shifted once again to those closest to her. Could Daniel, her ex-husband, have rented the vehicle under an alias? Did Richard, the neighbor, have the cunning to plan something this elaborate? Or was the stalker who sent those chilling emails the same person who had been driving the Tahoe that day? Detectives tried to reconstruct the SUV's movements. Witness reports suggested it had been spotted near Willow Road the morning Emily vanished, and later in the wooded area where it was found. But the gap in between remained a black hole. Where had it gone? What had happened inside during those missing hours? For Jacob, the discovery brought more questions than answers. His grandparents shielded him from the details, but children always sense more than adults realize. He overheard snippets of conversation, words like blood and forest. At school, he drew pictures of cars driving into the woods, always with his mother in the passenger seat. His grief was transforming into quiet despair. As weeks passed, the lab results came back. The blood in the SUV did indeed belong to Emily Parker. The confirmation was both a breakthrough and a heartbreak. The chances of finding her alive now seemed almost non-existent, but one detail offered a glimmer of hope. Alongside Emily's DNA, forensic teams detected traces of another person's blood, unidentified, male. Whoever had taken Emily may have been injured in the process. This meant he wasn't untouchable. He had left part of himself behind. Detectives now had to answer the most pressing question of all. Where was Emily? If the SUV was abandoned in the woods, was her body nearby? Or had the driver disposed of her elsewhere before ditching the vehicle? Search teams swept the forest for days, aided by cadaver dogs and drones. They covered miles of rugged terrain, finding scraps of clothing, beer cans, and discarded trash, but nothing that could be definitively tied to Emily. The abandoned SUV was a turning point in the case. It proved that Emily had been forcibly taken and that someone had gone to great lengths to hide their tracks. But it also meant something far darker. She had likely met a violent end. Still, without a body, detectives couldn't close the case. They needed more. They needed answers. And just when it seemed the investigation had reached another standstill, a shocking phone call came into the Maplewood Police Department. A man's voice, distorted and low, delivered only 4 words before hanging up. "You're looking too close." The Maplewood Police Department had grown accustomed to false leads, dead ends, and the endless static of tips that led nowhere. But the phone call was different. It came late on a Thursday evening, when the station was quieter than usual. The voice on the other end was deep, distorted, and chillingly deliberate. 4 words, nothing more. "You're looking too close." Then the line went dead. Detectives froze. In most missing person cases, time erodes public interest, and the trail fades into silence. But this call was proof that someone out there was not only watching, but also paying close attention to the investigation. Someone wanted the police to back off. The call was immediately traced, but as expected, it had been routed through a series of burners and online masking tools. No name, no address, no origin. The caller knew exactly how to stay hidden. What unsettled detectives most was the timing. The Tahoe had just been found. The blood analysis had only just confirmed Emily's DNA. This wasn't a coincidence. Whoever called had access to inside knowledge, details that hadn't been made public yet. The chilling possibility arose. Was the killer monitoring the investigation from within? The department grew tense. Files were double-checked, access was restricted, and every officer involved in the case was scrutinized. They couldn't rule out the chance that someone in law enforcement, or close to them, was leaking information. For Emily's family, the call was devastating. When detectives informed them, her mother broke down, begging to know why anyone would taunt them in such a cruel way. Jacob overheard, his young mind twisting the words into nightmares. That night, he told his grandmother he dreamed of the bad man calling from the woods. Detectives pushed forward with new urgency. They revisited the emails Emily had received before her disappearance, comparing the phrasing to the phone call. While the emails were cryptic and threatening, the call was blunt, a warning rather than a taunt. Still, the connection was too strong to ignore. A criminal profiler was brought in to analyze the communications. The expert suggested the caller was organized, intelligent, and deeply invested in control. "This isn't random," the profiler explained. "This is someone who sees themselves as playing a game. They want power over the investigation, over the family, and over Emily herself." The call wasn't just a warning, it was a display of dominance. Meanwhile, detectives chased every possible lead tied to the Tahoe. Rental records, repair shops, known offenders who drove similar vehicles, all dead ends. But one minor breakthrough came from the forest where the SUV was found. During a secondary search, a cadaver dog alerted at a shallow depression in the soil. Excavation revealed nothing human, but buried beneath the earth was a piece of duct tape smeared with traces of blood and hair. The hair was long, brown, and consistent with Emily's. This discovery painted a clearer picture. The SUV had been more than just a vehicle. It had been a crime scene. Emily had been restrained, injured, and likely transported against her will. Yet the question remained, where had she been taken after the SUV was abandoned? The threatening call shifted the focus once again. Whoever had taken Emily wasn't finished. They were still watching, still aware of every move detectives made. It suggested Emily's disappearance wasn't just about violence. It was about control, obsession, and manipulation. The community, once hopeful, now grew fearful. Parents walked their children to school in groups. Women refused to jog alone on wooded trails. Every black SUV on the road drew suspicious stares. Maplewood, once a quiet town, was now gripped by paranoia. Detectives released a public statement urging caution but withheld details about the call. They didn't want to give the suspect the satisfaction of seeing their warning spread through the media. Privately, though, they knew the game had escalated. One detail from the call haunted investigators. The voice hadn't sounded rushed or panicked. It had been calm, measured, almost confident. Whoever spoke believed they were untouchable. And then came the twist no one expected. A week after the call, another message arrived, not to the police but to Emily's family. Delivered in an unmarked envelope, it contained a single Polaroid photograph. The image showed a wooded clearing. In the center of the frame lay two body bags, zipped shut, side by side. The photograph was grainy, but in the corner, barely visible, was what looked like Emily's gray scarf. The message on the back was written in block letters. "She's not alone." The envelope was unremarkable, brown and slightly crumpled, but the contents sent a jolt through everyone who touched them. Emily's mother, still frail from months of anxious waiting, trembled as she carefully pulled out the Polaroid. Her hands shook, not just from fear, but from the cold realization that someone had inserted themselves between them and the truth in a way that was deeply personal, horrifyingly intimate. The photograph itself was small, the classic square of instant film, but what it contained filled the room with an almost tangible silence. In the frame, a wooded clearing stretched outward, trees casting long, jagged shadows across the ground. In the center, two body bags lay side by side, zipped shut, untouched by light except for the gray scarf Emily had worn on her last morning, draped over the edge of one. The note on the back in block letters, "She's not alone." Jacob, sitting quietly in the corner with his grandmother, let out a small, choked gasp. "Mommy," he whispered, his voice brittle with fear. He didn't need to ask whose bodies they were. He already understood, in the way children understand before adults want them to. His small fingers tightened around the edge of the sofa, knuckles white. Detectives were summoned immediately. The envelope, the photo, even the handwriting were now official evidence. Agent Harper, the lead investigator, ran her gloved fingers along the photo's surface. Polaroids carry unique chemical fingerprints. The light exposure, the focus, even the type of film could give them a clue. "This was staged," she murmured. "He wants us to see this. He wants us to feel it." The team worked quickly. They analyzed the trees and the angle of the shadows in the photograph, comparing them with satellite imagery and aerial photographs of the surrounding forests. Every detail, the placement of leaves, the way light filtered through the branches, was scrutinized. The clearing in the photo was remote, yet familiar. It was somewhere they had searched before, somewhere that had been overlooked. Forensic experts also noticed something subtle. The edges of the body bags weren't entirely flush with the ground. The snow, or frost, around the edges had been disturbed in a pattern consistent with dragging. Small prints, barely visible, led toward the tree line. Someone had staged this scene for the photograph, but it had been hastily done. A mistake. The profiler's report arrived later that evening. It painted a chilling picture of the person responsible. Obsessive, calculated. He needs to control the narrative. Sending the Polaroid is a demonstration of dominance, a way to assert ownership over both the crime and those investigating it. He wants us to see the fear he creates. This is a signature act, ritualized, symbolic. Meanwhile, detectives noticed a detail that would have been easy to overlook. A small, glinting object partially buried in the underbrush near one of the body bags. Zooming in on the Polaroid, they realized it was jewelry, a delicate silver locket. It was familiar. It had been listed among Emily's personal effects, a gift she had worn constantly. Whoever staged the photograph wanted to taunt them, yes, but this also provided the first concrete link to her identity in years. The police expanded their search, revisiting every location connected to the Tahoe and prior sightings of the mysterious SUV. They interviewed new potential witnesses, hikers, hunters, anyone who had passed through the area. Every person remembered something different, but slowly a pattern emerged. Someone had been monitoring this clearing for weeks, possibly months. Small signs, disturbed foliage, footprints, a discarded bottle pointed to repeated visits. Back at the station, the atmosphere was tense. Every officer knew the killer had calculated every move with precision. This wasn't a random act of violence. It was a performance. And the Polaroid? It was both a threat and a map. Somewhere within it lay the clue they needed to find the bodies, or perhaps the killer himself. Jacob's grandmother, sitting in the corner, tried to comfort him. "We'll find her, sweetie. We'll find your mommy," she whispered. But even she wasn't sure if she believed it. As night fell over Maplewood, Detective Harper reviewed the Polaroid again. The shadows, the positions of the body bags, the glint of the silver locket. It all pointed to a single location, somewhere hidden, yet not impossible to reach. She felt the weight of every decision made by the person who had sent the photograph. This killer wasn't just smart, he was meticulous, patient, and dangerously confident. The decision was made. A team would move at dawn to the clearing. Cameras, drones, dogs, and forensic gear would accompany them. The Polaroid had given them direction, but it had also put them on the killer's clock. Someone was watching. Someone was always watching. And somewhere, deep in the forest, in the shadows of the trees captured in the grainy photograph, the perpetrator waited, knowing the investigators would come, and knowing exactly what they would find. The Polaroid wasn't just a photograph, it was a warning, and it was only the beginning. Dawn broke over Maplewood with a muted gray light, the kind that made the forest seem both alive and menacing. Detective Harper's team moved carefully along the trail toward the clearing shown in the Polaroid. Every crunch of leaves beneath their boots felt amplified in the quiet morning. Cadaver dogs led the way, noses low to the ground, alert to the faintest trace of human scent. The clearing itself was just as depicted in the photograph. 2 body bags lay side by side, partially obscured by fallen branches and frost. The first bag had the unmistakable gray scarf Emily had worn on her last morning. Harper swallowed, her stomach knotting. Years of chasing shadows, leads that went nowhere, and now it was here, tangible, horrifying. Forensic teams immediately secured the scene. DNA analysis confirmed what they had feared but needed to hear aloud. One of the bodies was Emily Parker. The second body, male, matched the unidentified blood found in the Tahoe months prior. Whoever had abducted Emily had left traces of himself, but the body in the clearing offered the first real chance to link him to the crime. Detectives combed the area meticulously, Rope fibers, tiny fragments of duct tape, and footprints embedded in the mud all told a story. The placement of the body bag suggested care, almost ritualistic intent. Someone had wanted the victims discovered in a specific way. The Polaroid had not been a random act. It had been part of a game. Harper and her team began to reconstruct the timeline. Using the Polaroid as a guide combined with satellite data and eyewitness reports, they traced the movement of the Tahoe and the killer's likely path through the forest. Each clue pointed toward a single conclusion. Emily's disappearance had not been the result of a random encounter. Someone close to her life had orchestrated it. Back in town, Emily's family struggled to process the news. Her mother wept openly, clutching Jacob to her chest while the boy pressed his face into his grandmother's shoulder. "Mommy, she's really gone?" he asked quietly, voice trembling. There was no easy answer, only the cold certainty that their world had shifted irrevocably. As forensic reports came in, a grim picture emerged. Emily had been restrained and transported against her will. The second body, the male, offered a new lead. Fingerprints, DNA traces, and personal items found nearby pointed to someone who had access to Emily's life. Slowly, suspicion narrowed. Detective Harper and her team reviewed months of prior investigation, rental records of the Tahoe, the threatening emails, the mysterious SUV, and the call warning them to back off. Patterns emerged. They pointed to one individual, Thomas Parker, Emily's husband, whose alibi had always seemed thin. He had the motive, the opportunity, and now the indirect evidence was mounting against him. Financial records revealed debts Thomas had hidden, coupled with payments to an unknown recipient. Witnesses recalled arguments between Emily and Thomas regarding money and custody of Jacob. Forensic teams found that one of the blood traces at the Tahoe could be linked to a man with Thomas's DNA profile, further tightening the case. Meanwhile, investigators interviewed Emily's acquaintances once more. A former co-worker revealed that Emily had recently grown suspicious of Thomas's behavior, noting secretive calls and sudden absences. Another neighbor admitted seeing him near the forest on the morning Emily disappeared, a detail he had initially withheld. Every new revelation built toward a damning picture. Emily had been killed by someone who knew her routines intimately, someone she trusted enough to call her husband. The Polaroid had been the bridge between the years of silence and the emerging truth. The community, once caught in fear and speculation, now began to grasp the grim reality. Emily Parker had been taken from them not by chance, but by betrayal. Thomas Parker was no longer merely a person of interest. He was the prime suspect. Detective Harper's team prepared for the next phase, arresting Thomas and gathering the evidence that would finally allow justice for Emily. The forest, the Tahoe, the Polaroid, all pointed to one unambiguous conclusion. The truth, long buried under years of uncertainty and lies, had finally surfaced. As the sun rose higher, casting pale light over Maplewood, one thought weighed on everyone involved. While the evidence had brought clarity, it also revealed a darkness far closer to home than anyone had imagined. Maplewood Police Department had been building toward this moment for weeks. Every lead, every forensic detail, every tip, all of it had converged on one man, Thomas Parker. Once a familiar figure in town, a husband, a father, he now stood under a cloud of suspicion, so heavy it seemed to press the air from the room. Detective Harper and her team approached Thomas's residence early one morning. The house, quiet and unassuming from the outside, held a tension that seemed to vibrate through the walls. Officers knocked firmly, announcing themselves. Thomas answered the door, a forced calm etched across his face. His eyes betrayed nothing, but Harper knew better than to rely on appearances. "Thomas Parker," Harper said, her voice steady, professional. "You are being placed under arrest for the abduction and murder of Emily Parker." For a brief moment, Thomas froze. Then, almost imperceptibly, his shoulders sagged. He didn't resist as officers read him his rights and led him into the vehicle. The town had watched Emily disappear years ago, and now, after all the twists, the person they trusted most was at the center of it all. At the police station, investigators laid out the mounting evidence. They had the Polaroid, forensic analysis linking him to the Tahoe and to Emily's remains, witness accounts of suspicious behavior, and financial records suggesting motive. Additionally, Thomas's cell phone records revealed deleted messages that corresponded to Emily's disappearance timeline. The dam was closing in. Harper confronted him in the interrogation room. The walls were bare, the overhead light harsh. Thomas sat quietly, his hands folded on the table, his expression blank. "We have your blood in the Tahoe," Harper said, sliding the lab report across the table. "We have your transactions and movements connected to the location where Emily was held. We have witnesses who saw you near the forest the morning she disappeared. There's no escaping this, Thomas. It's over." He didn't respond immediately. Then, finally, in a low, measured voice, he spoke. It wasn't supposed to happen this way." Detectives exchanged a glance. Harper leaned forward. "Explain yourself." Thomas's confession unfolded slowly, like peeling layers from a wound too deep to ignore. He admitted to financial stress, secret debts, and a hidden affair, motivations he had thought would remain private. Arguments with Emily had escalated into violence, culminating in her death. He described how he had lured her into the Tahoe, restrained her, and transported her to the forest clearing. The Polaroid, he said, was meant as a final act of control, a message to the police that he was always one step ahead. "I wanted them to know I was in control," he admitted, voice trembling, eyes hollow. "I wanted to finish the story my way." Throughout the confession, Harper and her team recorded every word, knowing the weight of this testimony. It wasn't just a legal procedure, it was the unraveling of a community's nightmare. The meticulous planning, the deception, and the years of silence, all revealed in chilling detail. For Emily's family, the confirmation was a mixture of relief and devastation. Justice had finally begun, but the truth came at a price. Their daughter, their mother, was gone. The boy, Jacob, would grow up knowing the identity of the person responsible for his mother's death. The confession also provided clarity on every prior piece of evidence: the threatening emails, the SUV, the Tahoe, the Polaroid, all acts calculated to obscure the truth and manipulate those who searched for Emily. Thomas had orchestrated each step with meticulous precision. Once the confession was complete, Harper's team began compiling the evidence for the prosecution. Every photograph, every lab result, every witness testimony would be presented in court. Thomas Parker would face the full weight of the law. As he was led from the interrogation room to a holding cell, his face expressionless, Harper couldn't help but feel the gravity of the case. Years of pain, uncertainty, and fear had finally found resolution in truth. But the emotional toll on a community, on a family, and on a young boy would linger long after the legal process concluded. In the quiet aftermath, Harper reviewed the case files one final time. The path had been dark, tortuous, and cruel. But now, at last, Emily Parker's story had been told, and justice, though long delayed, was finally underway. The courtroom was silent, the weight of years pressing on everyone present. Maplewood had followed the case with a mix of fascination, fear, and sorrow. Now, after nearly 6 years, the trial of Thomas Parker was finally underway. Emily Parker's family sat together, hands clasped, shoulders touching for support. Jacob, now 12, had grown quieter, more reserved, the absence of his mother a constant shadow over his childhood. Yet he sat upright, determined, watching as the man who had taken everything from him faced justice. Prosecutors laid out the case methodically. The Polaroid photograph, the Tahoe, the forensic evidence, and the confession. all painted a portrait of a calculated, manipulative killer. Witnesses testified about Emily's last known moments, about Thomas's erratic behavior, and about the years of anguish her family endured. The evidence was irrefutable. When Thomas Parker took the stand, his demeanor was cold, detached. He offered few words, attempting to minimize responsibility. But every statement he made only reinforced the prosecution's narrative. The jury watched, the tension in the room palpable, as the full scope of his deception and cruelty unfolded. After days of testimony, the jury deliberated. Hours felt like eternity. Outside the courtroom, the community waited, holding collective breath, anxious for the closure that had seemed so far away. Finally, the verdict was read. Guilty on all counts. Thomas Parker was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Relief washed over Emily's family, mingled with grief and the unshakable sorrow of loss. Justice had been served, but it could not bring back the years stolen, the innocence lost, or the mother and wife who would never return. Jacob clung to his grandmother on the way home. For the first time in years, he allowed himself a glimmer of hope. Though the pain remained, the truth now gave him a foundation to begin healing. His mother's memory, preserved through photographs, stories, and the love that surrounded him, could finally exist without the shadow of uncertainty. The town of Maplewood slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. Parents escorted children to school in groups. Women felt safer walking the trails, and the forest that had once been a site of fear gradually became a place of remembrance. A small memorial for Emily was erected near the school where she had last been seen, a place where the community could honor her life and reflect on the lessons learned. Detective Harper stood before the memorial one chilly autumn morning, watching Jacob place a small bouquet of wildflowers at the base. She thought of the long investigation, the dead ends, and the relentless pursuit of truth. The case had been harrowing, but it had also shown the resilience of those who refused to give up. In her notebook, Harper wrote the final line of the case file. For years, the community believed Emily had vanished into thin air, but the truth was darker, and it lived much closer to home. Emily Parker's story, once shrouded in mystery and fear, had been told. Her life, her disappearance, and the betrayal that ended it became a cautionary tale, a testament to the importance of vigilance, justice, and the enduring power of truth. Jacob would grow up with the memory of his mother, her warmth and kindness shaping who he would become. Though life could never fully erase the horror of her loss, the community and his family would ensure that Emily Parker's name and her story would never be forgotten. And somewhere deep in Maplewood, the forest held the echoes of the past, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, perseverance and truth could bring resolution.